In the heart of the frozen wilderness, a black woman survivor dragged a half-frozen white man from the snow, saving him from the grip of death. He didn't remember who he was or how he got there, but she didn't care. He was just another lost traveler in need of rescue. What neither of them knew was that this chance encounter would change both of their lives forever. The wind howled through the desolate valley, carrying the sharp sting of snow that whipped against Naomi Carter's dark skin. Each step she took sank deep into the thick snow, her worn boots barely holding up against the cold. The sky overhead was an ominous gray, the kind that warned of a storm that would swallow everything whole. She pulled her tattered coat tighter around her, muttering a curse under her breath. Winters in the Canadian wilderness were always unforgiving, but this one seemed particularly cruel. She had wandered farther than usual in search of firewood. The dense forest at the base of the mountain loomed in eerie silence, the towering pines standing like frozen sentinels. The only sound was the groaning wind pushing through the trees. Naomi adjusted the axe slung across her back, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. Then she heard it, a sound, faint, almost lost in the howling wind, a low guttural moan. She froze, her pulse quickening. At first she thought she had imagined it, just another trick of the wind, but then it came again, a weak, pain-laced groan. Her eyes darted around, scanning the snowy expanse. The sound was close, but the storm made it impossible to pinpoint its direction. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sharp against the icy air. No answer. Instinct screamed at her to leave it alone. Nothing good ever came from finding strangers out here, but she had never been one to ignore someone in need, no matter how hardened the world had made her. Taking a cautious step forward, she moved toward the sound, each crunch of her boots against the snow echoing unnervingly. And then, through the swirling white, she saw it, a dark shape, barely visible beneath a mound of fresh snow. Her breath caught in her throat. She rushed forward, falling to her knees beside the figure, brushing away the frost with quick, efficient hands. A man, his face pale, lips nearly blue, dark hair frozen at the edges. His clothes, expensive, well-made, were soaked through, offering him no protection against the brutal cold. His fingers were stiff with frostbite, his chest barely rising. "Hey, can you hear me?" Naomi shook his shoulder, but he barely reacted. "Wake up!" A weak groan escaped his lips. His fingers twitched slightly, as if fighting against the cold's deadly grip. "You need to wake up," she said firmly, leaning closer. "If you stay out here, you're dead." His lips parted slightly, and for a moment she thought he would speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. "Help." Naomi clenched her jaw, quickly assessing the situation. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood stained the snow beneath him. A broken leg in this weather? He wouldn't last much longer. Cursing under her breath, she grabbed his arm and tried to pull him up. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight against the snow. "Come on," she gritted, shifting his arm over her shoulder. "I ain't about to let you die out here." Every step was a battle. The deep snow fought against her. The wind cut through her coat like a blade, but she refused to stop. The man groaned in pain as she dragged him forward, his head lolling against her shoulder. He was slipping, falling deeper into unconsciousness. Naomi didn't care who he was or how he ended up here. All that mattered now was getting him home before the cold claimed him forever. Naomi burst through the cabin door, half dragging, half carrying the nearly lifeless man inside. The warmth hit her like a wall, thick and suffocating compared to the brutal cold outside, but she didn't stop. With a final, exhausted heave, she lowered him onto the worn-out couch near the fireplace, her muscles screaming in protest. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, the weight of the journey pressing down on her. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. A stark contrast to the frozen wilderness she had just fought through. She didn't have time to rest. Moving quickly, she grabbed a thick blanket from the trunk at the foot of the bed and wrapped it around the man's trembling frame. His skin was ice cold, his fingers stiff, his breath shallow. Hypothermia had its claws in him, and if she didn't act fast, it would drag him under. The door creaked open, and Naomi didn't have to look up to know who it was. The sharp scent of pine and smoke clung to the woman's heavy furs as she stepped inside. "So this is the stray you dragged in from the snow?" Agnes Carter said, her voice lined with both curiosity and disapproval. Naomi didn't answer immediately. She was too busy kneeling beside the man, pulling off his soaked gloves, wincing at the sight of his frostbitten fingertips. She reached for the kettle hanging over the fire, poured warm water into a small tin bowl, and carefully pressed a cloth against his frozen hands. He stirred slightly, a faint groan slipping from his lips, but his eyes remained closed. "His leg's busted," Naomi muttered, finally looking up, "and he's half frozen." Agnes narrowed her sharp, dark eyes at the man, her lined face unreadable. "You don't know him. You don't know what kind of trouble he brings." Naomi exhaled sharply, rubbing warmth into the man's stiff fingers. "I know he was dying out there. That ain't the same as saying he should be here." Agnes stepped closer, her gaze sweeping over the man with something between suspicion and resignation. "He don't belong in these parts, Naomi. Look at him, clothes like that. Ain't no lumberjack, ain't no hunter. Ain't nobody round here missing a man like this." Naomi knew exactly what her grandmother was implying. A white man, wearing expensive clothes, left for dead in the middle of a snowstorm. No one out here would claim him because no one like him belonged here. She had spent her whole damn life knowing exactly what people like him thought of people like her. But right now he wasn't some rich outsider. He was a half-dead man in her home, and she wasn't about to let him die under her roof. "In stays," Naomi said firmly, wringing out the cloth and pressing it against his frost-bitten face. "At least until he ain't knocking on death's door." Agnes let out a slow, tired sigh. "You got a soft heart, girl." Naomi didn't answer. She just kept working, hands steady, mind focused. She cut away the torn fabric of his pant leg, her stomach twisting at the sight of the deep gash running along his shin. It was bad. Angry, swollen, the edges raw with infection waiting to set in. If it festered, he wouldn't last long. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound with warm water and an herbal salve she had learned to make from Agnes years ago. The man groaned in pain, his fingers twitching weakly against the blanket. He was fighting, at least. That was a good sign. Hours passed. Naomi sat in the wooden chair across from the couch, watching him carefully. His breathing had steadied, his face no longer ghostly pale. The firelight flickered over his sharp features, casting deep shadows across his jawline, his furrowed brow. He didn't look like a local. Too refined, too untouched by a life of hard labor. She wondered briefly what had brought him here. Then, as if pulled from the depths of some restless dream, the man stirred. His brow creased, his breath hitched, and his eyelids fluttered open. Gray eyes, stormy and unfocused, darted around the cabin in confusion. "You're awake," Naomi said, standing and stepping closer. The man blinked, struggling to sit up. A grimace of pain crossed his face, and he clutched at his bandaged leg. "Where?" His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, then tried again. "Where am I?" "My cabin," Naomi answered, arms crossed. "You were half dead in the snow. I found you." He groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't remember." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "You don't remember how you ended up bleeding out in the middle of nowhere?" The man's gaze flickered toward the fire, his jaw tightening. After a long moment he muttered, "No, it's all just a blur." Naomi studied him carefully. He didn't seem to be lying. But that didn't mean she trusted him. "Got a name?" she asked. A pause, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Then, finally, "Daniel." His voice was rough, uncertain. "Daniel Whitmore." Something about the name stirred at the edge of her mind, but she couldn't place it. Didn't matter. "Well, Danielle Whitmore," Naomi said, crossing her arms tighter. "You got real lucky I found you when I did." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "Yeah, lucky." But Naomi didn't miss the way his expression darkened, like somewhere deep down he knew. Luck had nothing to do with it. The days bled into each other, marked only by the shifting light through the cabin windows and the distant howl of the wind outside. Daniel was healing, slowly, but his mind remained a blank slate. He remembered his name, That much had come back to him, but anything beyond that was like trying to grasp smoke. Frustration gnawed at him. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt something lurking at the edges of his memory, but the moment he reached for it, it was gone. Naomi didn't press him for answers. She had made it clear from the start his past wasn't her concern. As long as he wasn't a threat, she didn't care who he was or what he had been before the storm swallowed him whole. But what she did care about was survival, and if he was going to be under her roof, he wasn't going to be dead weight. "You ain't just going to sit there and rot," she said one morning, standing over him with arms crossed. "If you're breathing, you're working." Daniel, still sore and stiff from his injuries, shot her a look. "You dragged me out of a snowstorm just to make me a farmhand?" "This ain't a farm," she shot back, tossing a bundle of thick clothes onto his lap. "And you ain't special." Daniel exhaled sharply but didn't argue. What choice did he have? He wasn't in any position to leave, not with his legs still weak and the outside world nothing but a frozen death trap. So, for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel Whitmore worked. And he was terrible at it. The axe was heavier than he expected, and when he swung it, the log barely splintered. His arms ached from carrying water from the stream, his fingers clumsy with the knots Naomi had tied 1,000 times without thought. Even stacking firewood seemed to elude him, the logs slipping from his grasp like they were mocking him. Naomi watched him struggle, unimpressed. "Damn, you're useless." Daniel scowled, rolling the tension out of his shoulders. "I wasn't exactly raised to split logs for a living." "No kidding." She took the axe from him, adjusting his grip with calloused fingers. "Stand like this. Swing with your whole body, not just your arms. Otherwise you'll be out here all day making kindling." Daniel hesitated, then mimicked her stance. His second swing was better, still rough, but at least this time the wood split clean in two. He felt an odd sense of satisfaction, a foreign feeling that had nothing to do with money or power. It was real. The days stretched into weeks. Daniel adapted, not gracefully but steadily. He learned to keep the fire going, to haul water without spilling half of it on himself, to repair the small things around the cabin that needed fixing. The wilderness, once nothing but a cruel, merciless void, became something tangible, something that demanded respect but also gave in return. But no matter how much progress he made, one thing remained the same. Naomi. She was a force, unyielding, relentless, a woman who had carved out a life for herself in a world that wasn't meant to be kind to her. She never sugar-coated her words, never softened the edges for his sake. And yet she had saved him. A man like him. She had pulled him from the snow and given him a chance to live when the world had clearly decided he wasn't worth saving. He thought about that more than he cared to admit. One evening, as the fire crackled low in the hearth, Daniel leaned back against the old wooden chair, watching Naomi mend a torn sleeve. His hands were rougher now, the cuts and calluses proof of the life he was slowly stepping into. He flexed his fingers absent-mindedly. "This is normal for you, huh?" he mused, breaking the quiet. Naomi didn't look up. "What is?" "Hunting for food, chopping wood just to stay warm, making everything from scratch." She shrugged. "It ain't easy, but it's life." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't think I've ever had to work this hard for anything." Naomi glanced at him then, something unreadable in her dark eyes. "Ain't that a damn shame?" Daniel let out a dry laugh, rubbing his temple. Yeah, it is." For the first time he wondered if he had been living his whole life wrong. The first memory came like a strike of lightning, quick, blinding, and gone before he could make sense of it. Daniel had been mending a broken snare, fingers numb from the cold, when suddenly his vision blurred and he was somewhere else. A polished mahogany desk, the scent of leather and expensive cologne, a voice, his own, saying something he couldn't quite catch. His breath hitched, his grip tightening around the wire in his hands. Then, just as fast as it came, the memory vanished, leaving him standing in the snow, disoriented and shaken. Naomi caught the shift in his expression immediately. She had a way of reading people without them having to say a damn thing. "What?" she asked, watching him closely. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. He hesitated. Nothing. Naomi didn't push, but she didn't need to. The look in her eyes told him she knew it wasn't nothing. The memories came more frequently after that, fractured pieces, slipping through the cracks of his mind like melting ice, a city skyline at dusk, the distant hum of traffic, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and then voices, sharp, urgent, tangled in tension, contracts, negotiations, a name lingering just out of reach, like a ghost whispering from the dark. Then, one night, it all came rushing back. The fire had burned low, its embers casting faint orange glows against the cabin walls. Daniel had been sitting at the table, staring absently at the silver pocket watch Naomi had let him borrow. His own had been missing when she found him. The rhythmic ticking filled the quiet, steady and unyielding. Then, like a dam breaking, the memories hit all at once. His name wasn't just Daniel Whitmore. It was Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, a company that dealt in high-stakes investments and corporate acquisitions. He had come to Canada for one reason: to finalize a deal that would grant him ownership of a vast gold mining operation, a deal worth billions. But not everyone had been happy about it. Jonathan Reed, his right-hand man, his most trusted advisor, the last person he remembered seeing before waking up in the snow. Daniel clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists. He could see it now, the private meeting in a luxury lodge, the way Jonathan had poured him a drink, that practiced, easy smile on his face as he spoke. "By this time tomorrow the mine will be yours." Daniel had nodded, taking a sip of his whiskey, not realizing until it was too late that something was off, a bitterness in the drink that shouldn't have been there. His vision had blurred, the room had spun, and then darkness. He had been betrayed, left for dead. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Naomi must have noticed the change in his demeanor because she spoke, her voice measured. "You remember, don't you?" Daniel inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "Yeah," he said, his voice tight. "I remember." Naomi studied him carefully, her gaze unreadable. "And?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "And I was an idiot." Naomi raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "All this time," he muttered, running a hand through his hair, "I thought I was in control, thought I knew the people around me, but I was blind. I trusted him." He exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "And he tried to kill me for money." Naomi's expression didn't change. "Sounds about right?" Daniel let out a humorless chuckle. "You're not surprised." "I grew up watching men with power do whatever it took to keep it," she said simply. "Ain't nothing new." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that didn't quite hide the hardness in her eyes, the kind that came from a lifetime of seeing the world exactly as it was. She had saved him without knowing who he was, had given him shelter, food, a second chance. And now that he knew the truth, he realized something else. She had expected nothing in return. He swallowed, his voice quieter this time. "I have to go back." Naomi leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Figures." "If I don't stop him, he wins," Daniel said, shaking his head. "He takes everything I built. He gets away with it." Naomi studied him for a long moment before speaking. "And after?" Daniel hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Naomi exhaled, shaking her head. "Typical." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I don't expect you to understand." "Oh, I understand just fine," she cut in. "You want to go back to your world, fight for what's yours. Fine. But don't pretend like this place didn't teach you something." Daniel held her gaze, something unreadable passing between them. Then, finally, he nodded. "I won't forget," he said, and for the first time he meant it. The morning Daniel left, the sky was a dull, heavy gray, thick with the promise of another storm. The air was sharp, biting against his skin despite the layers Naomi had made him wear. The sled dogs, restless and eager, pawed at the snow, their breath coming in sharp, visible bursts. His legs still ached, the injury not fully healed, but he could move. He could ride. And that was all that mattered. Naomi stood near the cabin, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Agnes stood beside her, wrapped in thick furs, watching him with the same hard expression she always had. Neither of them spoke right away. Daniel adjusted the straps on the sled, double-checked the supplies Naomi had packed for him: food, water, spare furs, everything he'd need for the long journey back. He exhaled, steadying himself, then turned to face her. "You sure you're ready for this, city boy?" Naomi's voice was flat, but there was something beneath it, something she wasn't saying. Daniel smirked, but the usual arrogance wasn't there. "Pretty sure I don't have a choice." Naomi held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded, just once. Agnes shifted, her sharp eyes locking onto him. "Be careful out there, boy. The world ain't as forgiving as this place." Daniel let out a breath, glancing back at the cabin, the place that had kept him alive, the place that had changed him in ways he hadn't even begun to understand yet. "I know." For a moment there was only silence. Then, slowly, Daniel reached into his coat pocket, fingers curling around something small and cold. He stepped forward and pressed it into Naomi's hand. She frowned, looking down. A silver compass, worn with age, its surface scratched and weathered. "My grandfather's," Daniel said quietly. "He used to say it'd always point him home." Naomi's fingers tightened around the metal. She looked up, studying him with the same careful intensity she always did. "And where's home for you?" Daniel hesitated. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. A gust of wind tore through the trees, sending loose snow swirling between them. Naomi exhaled, shook her head, then slipped the compass into her pocket. "You better figure it out," she said. Daniel nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Then, without another word, he climbed onto the sled. With a sharp command, the dogs lurched forward, kicking up a flurry of white. The sled cut through the snow, fast and relentless, pulling him away from the cabin, from the trees, from the only place that had ever stripped him down to nothing and built him back up again. Naomi stood there, watching until he disappeared into the white horizon, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt something unfamiliar. The city was just as Daniel had left it, cold in a different way, a steel and glass jungle where power dictated survival. He stepped off the private plane, the hum of the engines still ringing in his ears, but something in him had shifted. The man who had left New York months ago wasn't the same man who had returned. He walked through the airport, his reflection catching in the towering windows, and for the first time, he barely recognized himself. Mark Stevenson had been expecting a dead man. When Daniel walked through the doors of Whitmore Industries, the look on Mark's face was worth every mile of the frozen wilderness he had crawled out of. The boardroom had been prepared for a meeting, papers laid out, contracts waiting for a signature. Mark had moved fast, securing his grip on the company while Daniel was presumed lost. Too bad for him, Daniel Whitmore wasn't that easy to kill. The betrayal had been surgical, precise. The contracts in front of Mark were set to finalize a deal that would gut the company, selling off its most valuable assets to competitors, deals that Mark himself had orchestrated in the name of salvaging Whitmore Industries after its CEO's mysterious disappearance. Daniel had seen enough. He strode into the room, voice steady but sharp as a blade. "I believe you have something of mine." The room fell silent. Mark paled. He stuttered, tried to recover, but it was too late. Daniel wasn't interested in explanations. By the end of the day, security had escorted Mark out, and within a week the man was facing a full-blown legal investigation. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. The moment Daniel reclaimed his place, he realized something unsettling. The hunger for power, for wealth, for control that had once driven him felt hollow now. He sat in his office, looking out at the city skyline, and all he saw was a world he no longer belonged to. The fight had been necessary, but this wasn't what he wanted anymore. So he made a decision. Whitmore Industries would not continue its old path. No more ruthless acquisitions, no more bleeding communities dry in the name of profit. Instead, Daniel redirected resources, shifting focus to sustainable development, ethical investments, real change. It wasn't easy. People resisted, shareholders balked, but he didn't care. For the first time, he wasn't chasing numbers, he was doing something that mattered. Months passed, and winter slowly gave way to spring. The wilderness had faded into memory, but Naomi Carter had not. Daniel hadn't written, he hadn't called. He didn't need to. He had promised he wouldn't forget, and he intended to prove it. The first sign of his return came when a convoy of snow-covered trucks pulled up outside Naomi's cabin. She was outside, stacking firewood, when she heard the engines rumbling in the distance. Agnes stepped onto the porch beside her, frowning. "Expecting company?" the old woman asked dryly. Naomi wiped her hands on her coat, shaking her head. "Not unless the damn government finally decided to run us out." Then the car door opened and Daniel Whitmore stepped out. He looked different, not just because he had trimmed the scruff from his jaw or swapped the heavy furs for a tailored coat. There was something else, something quieter, steadier, like a man who had finally figured out what the hell he was supposed to do with himself. Naomi crossed her arms as he approached. "City boy found his way back?" Daniel smirked, stopping a few feet in front of her. "Told you I would." She studied him, eyes sharp, unreadable as always. Then, glancing past him, she gestured toward the trucks. "And what the hell is all this?" Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope, handing it to her. "Open it." Naomi hesitated, then tore the seal. Inside were legal documents, land deeds, transfer agreements, paperwork stamped with official seals. She scanned the pages, her pulse picking up as she read. Daniel spoke before she could ask. "I bought the land just south of the village. The government was planning to sell it to a developer, someone who would have turned it into another mining operation. Now it belongs to the people here." Naomi's fingers tightened around the papers. Land. Their land, protected, untouchable. A future they had never dared to hope for. She looked up at him, her voice quiet. "Why?" Daniel exhaled, glancing around at the land that had once saved his life. "Because I was one of them," he said, nodding toward the papers. "The ones who take and never think about what's left behind. I can't change what I was, but I can change what I do now." Naomi swallowed, but before she could say anything, Daniel handed her another envelope, heavier this time. She arched an eyebrow. "More land?" He chuckled. "Not quite. That's for you." Slowly she pulled out the papers inside. Grants, funding proposals, a breakdown of resources allocated to establish something she had never even considered. A wilderness survival training center. Daniel smiled, his voice lighter now. "I figured, since you spent months keeping my sorry ass alive, maybe you could teach other people how to do the same." For the first time in a long time, Naomi Carter was speechless. Agnes, who had been silent this whole time, finally stepped forward, peering over Naomi's shoulder at the paperwork. She let out a low whistle. "Well, damn. Guess you really did learn something after all." Daniel grinned. "I had a good teacher." Naomi closed the envelope, tucking it under her arm. She met Daniel's gaze, searching, and whatever she found there must have been enough, because she just shook her head, exhaling a quiet laugh. "Well, hell," she muttered, slipping her hand into her pocket, fingers brushing against the old silver compass. "Didn't see that coming." Daniel smirked. "That makes two of us." The wind rustled through the trees, the sky stretching wide and open above them. Daniel glanced around one last time, breathing in the crisp mountain air, the scent of pine and smoke, of earth untouched by greed. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.